We are going to welcome a lady to the show who I've always been a fan of her music, and she has a new album. Well, a new old album, a recording from 1994, actually, a live recording coming that is now out called Live in New York. And it's wonderful to welcome to the show Sass Jordan joining us right now. Sass, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Eddie?
Very, very good. Good to talk to you, and good to have you on the show. Tell me how, we do a lot on this show about Canadian artists because we broadcast into Canada, and I have a lot of friends that live in the U.S. that are Canadian. We talk about Canadian rock bands all the time. Tell me how things have been for you in recent times, because I noticed you have tour dates and stuff coming up. They're all in Canada. Is that where the concentration for you is these days as far as touring and playing live?
Yeah, it's all about the money, kid.
Oh, I know.
And you can ask any artist out there right now. It's just, it's more insane than it's ever been as far as the expenses and the cost. It's just crazy. And definitely Canada is a hot spot for me. So I just, a whole bunch of people got together and went, we got to get Sass's ass down here. I'd be there with bells on.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Yeah, you've got to go where it makes sense and where the opportunity is and all of that. I completely get that. So, Sass, what is it like? What is the business like for you in Canada? Because we know of you in the U.S. when you first came on the scene in the early 90s, and we're going to talk about this live record from that time in just a second. But, you got some traction, certainly, on those first couple records here in America. It didn't really hold. It didn't really go to the next level, unfortunately. But in Canada, was it a different story for you? Because here in America, we hear all the time about bands and artists that have huge hits in Canada and are relatively unknown here in America. You're certainly not unknown in America, but is it a much bigger success story in Canada for you?
I guess so. I never think about these things, Eddie, but I guess so, because I still do, great dates like live shows and stuff like that. As far as the States, it's like anything. I actually play a lot in Europe as well. But as far as like how you have to keep going at it, that's the thing. And I didn't. I took breaks. I got pregnant. I had a baby. I then did a TV show for 6 years. You know what I mean? And I wasn't constantly working it. And that's really what you got to do if you want any kind of consistent longevity. You know what I mean? Unless you come out with some fabulous song, that gets played on Yellowstone or something. And all of a sudden you're on everybody's radar again,
What was the TV show that you did?
It was called Canadian Idol. It was the same thing as American Idol. And the weirdest thing about the whole situation was years and years ago, when I was like 18 or 19 years old, I lived in this house in Montreal, and one day my roommate came home with somebody that they'd met at the bar. And my roommate was British, and this person that they met at the bar was British as well. So that's, of course, how they were like, oh, come on. Because the person was getting kicked out of their hotel room. They were a manager, and they had brought over this band from England, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they just had no money left, blah, blah, blah. So long story short, God bless me if I can do a long story short, but I'm going to do my best. This guy lives in our basement for like about 3 months, and he hangs out. Anyways, he wants to be a manager. That's what he wants to do. He goes back to England and finally gets a job in this huge management company, and he has one artist. He brings this artist in. 3 months later, they got the biggest hit in the world. It was a song called 19 by, I forgot his name, but it went like, no, 19. It was, Paul Hardcastle. That's who it was. God, I can't believe I just downloaded that. Paul Hardcastle. Anyways, 10,000 years later, that guy turns out to be the guy that creates the Idol situation. Like,
is that right?
Manager. It's not Simon Cowell. It's the other Simon. And of course, I just remembered everything. Now I can't think of Simon's last name. The other Simon.
Well, that's, if I'm not, I didn't really watch those shows, but I'm pretty sure
neither did I.
But I'm pretty sure the company that produced it was called 19 Entertainment.
It was, and that's exactly why.
So there you go.
Exactly
Wow.
why. Yep. Wild, isn't it? But that's not how I got the job on the show. I went through the audition process and everything. The only reason I did it was because it was tons of dough, bro.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. There's nothing wrong with that.
Turned out to be a blast, though. So much fun.
So, Sass, when you came on everyone's radar in America, it was in the early mid '90s, Rats and those early records. Prior to that, prior to us hearing about you in the U.S. back in the '90s, were you in other bands? Were you doing other things that we didn't know about before you started out as a solo artist? Then?
Oh my God, yeah. I started playing shows. Live professional shows in the 70s. I am a dinosaurus. Anyways, yeah, I started playing in the 70s, for God's sake. At the end of the 70s, I was the bass player in our band, which was called the Pinups, and I was the co-lead singer. And then I did, oh my God, you're making me think of all this. Then I was like a VJ on the first video, like a TV show, in Canada before Much Music and all of that stuff, which was whatever the hell it was in the States. Can't think of that either right now. But yeah, so it was before all that. So all the artists that came through Montreal were all forced to do this show. So I was talking to people like Accept, Def Leppard, In Excess. I mean, the list, Brian Ferry, it goes on and Kiss. There was another one. That's how I ended up going to LA for the first time. Well, that's not how I ended up doing it because he didn't even remember. But I had to interview Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. It was their 10th anniversary. That's how long ago it was. They had Cheap Trick opening for them. It's end of 70s or something. Anyway, and I'm like 20 years old interviewing these guys. And do you think for 1 second that maybe I would do some research? Oh, no. And I didn't have to be a huge Kiss fan. You know what I'm saying? So I had no idea at all what I was dealing with. And the two guys are sitting there and I'm asking them the dumbest ass questions you have ever heard in your entire life. And they were getting a little pissy, and I don't blame them because I know it's like me on the other end of that crap.
Yeah. I got to look. I'm sure that's online like everything, right? I'm sure I could find that if I wanted to.
It is. It's utterly embarrassing. I highly suggest you just pass that sucker by.
Have you been approached a lot in your career after, you did these early solo records about joining bands? I remember, if I'm not mistaken, my friend Brian Tishy, didn't you guys have a band together for a brief time?
Yeah, we did. Something unto nothing. Very,
yes.
Very cool. It was a fantastic project. Yeah, Cry of Love. They needed a singer, but that didn't work out, and that's a bit of a story. And I know we don't have all the time in the world here, but I can talk the leg off a wood stove, so I'm just warning you. Anyhow, so yeah, that, and then also Van Halen, but I didn't realize it at the time. However, yeah. So
whoa! You can't. Well, hold on. You can't just gloss right past Van Halen and say, "Oh, yeah," but please tell the audience about that, because I had heard Van Halen had some interest in bringing in potentially a female singer. There was talk, Patti Smythe of Scandal. I'd heard some stuff. What was your experience? We got to hear about that.
Okay. Well, actually, if you really want to know, I'm just going to let you know. It's on my website, sassjordan.com, pages Van Halen. And the whole story is written out because I wrote the whole thing out when Eddie passed. However, what happened was one day I was sitting at home. Don't forget, this is the early 90s or the mid 90s. So we do not have cell phones, nor do we have, it didn't read out who was calling, and it would have been blocked anyway, because I know those guys. Anyhow, the phone rings. For some reason, I answered, which is unusual. I answered the thing, and there's this really undercover kind of secret agent vibe guy on the other end, which normally you would hang up. I don't know why I didn't. And he's like, "Is this Sass Jordan?" I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Who is this?" "I can't tell you who it is. I just need you to get in your car and drive up to this address." I'm like, "Are you out of your mind? Who are you?" Anyways, they just went on and on and on, and it was obvious to me that it was not like a complete whack job. There was something going on for sure. Hang up the phone, and 2 seconds later, Ray Daniels calls me, who I knew, who was their manager at the time, and I knew him. And he calls me, goes, "Did Al just call you?" And I'm like, "Somebody called me. Who's Al?" And he goes, "Van Halen, you idiot." And he goes, they want you to go up and try out some songs with them. You got to go. And that's how the whole thing started.
Because Ray Daniels was managing Van Halen at the time, and this was around the time, I guess, before Gary Cherone came into the band, right?
It is, absolutely. And guess who managed Gary Cherone? Guess. 2 guesses. First one.
Well, Ray, right?
Uh-huh. Anyhow, it's a bit of a long story, and you know me in long stories, so I'm not going to go any farther, but you get the idea.
So did you ever go to meet with them and rehearse with them?
Oh, my God, I was with them for like 4 months. Just me, Al, and Ed, and Scotty, Ed's guitar tech, up at Ed's house for God's sake. Anyways, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. And it was very interesting. Basically, my job was bum boy to the stars, also known as they needed somebody to do the beer and cigarette runs. So we basically sat around and talked nonstop about everything under the sun for 4 months. And they played me some stuff, but they never, ever said to me, you know, we're thinking of getting a female singer in the back. Because one day I looked at them. I don't know what the hell we were talking about, but suddenly I got this vibe, like, they're not actually thinking of having a female singer in this band, let alone me, for God's sake. And I looked at them and I said, guys, you're not actually thinking of having a female singer in this band, are you? And they both look at me with these huge saucer eyes and they go, no.
So were you like, well, what the hell am I doing here?
I said, no, I thought I was just going to be, you know, playing, you know, just singing on some stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But they had nothing finished. And they gave me like a tape, a cassette, because that was a cassette days. And they gave me this cassette of like a bunch of just music, you know, just, it didn't have really any kind of structure or anything like that. And I listened to it and I said, well, you want me to do this? I don't even know where the goddamn chorus is. Right. And they were like, oh, no, anyway, I never got around to it because I thought they were just messing around, you know what I'm saying? Which is kind of what they were doing. Anyways, I told them, you know, I think having a female singer in this band is the worst effing idea I have ever heard. And they were like, oh, okay. And then that night, Ray calls again, and I said, Ray, I swear to God, I thought they were, for a second there, I thought they were thinking of having like a female singer in this band. And he said, well, of course they were, but I thought I told them that's the worst goddamn idea I've ever heard. He said the same thing. So that took care of that. And I didn't know anything about any of the other people like Patty Smythe, or there was another guy who had blonde hair with lots of curls. I can't remember his name either.
Mitch Malloy.
Yeah.
Mitch Malloy.
What?
Mitch Malloy.
Okay, that's it. Boom. Anyway, I didn't know anything about any of those people. I never saw them. They never spoke of them, nothing. They just basically, they did a lot of, those guys were thick as thieves, those two. I don't need to tell you, right? And so
brothers,
they didn't do anything without the other. And they get into these god-awful scraps. I'd be like, guys, come, guys. They'd be like scrapping like you wouldn't believe. But it was an amazing, amazing experience because, you know, I grew up with Van Halen being one of the biggest bands in my life, you know?
So did you ever actually play and sing with them, either live in a studio or record anything? You never recorded anything?
Not only that, not one single photograph. Not one.
Wow.
Of course, it wasn't cell phones then, so you know,
right.
If I'd had a cell phone, I guarantee you would have. But it was those cameras that you bought when you were going through the checkout at the supermarket, and they had those little cameras, you know, those disposable cameras. And there was no way I was whipping that stuff out because, you know, it's uncomfortable. You're hanging out with people. They're like super mega famous, but they're just people. But I didn't want to start like hassling, you know, I got to take pictures, guys. I want to take, you know, I just didn't want to do that. And I didn't. Sadly.
Yeah. Wow, what a great story, though. So now I remember seeing you play in New York City early on. I don't remember what record it was for. And when I saw you were releasing a live album from 94, I thought to myself, I was like, damn, I may have been at that show. But I recall seeing you at a club in New York City called the Cat Club.
Yeah. I remember that name.
Yeah, which is not there anymore. So it might have been before this. It may have been for the first record. I don't recall, but I remember seeing you play at the Cat Club. But this show is not from that, but it is from a show in New York in 94. So tell us a little bit about this live record, which is now out. And of course, it celebrates the late Taylor Hawkins, who of course was in your band at that time. So tell me about this recording. Did you come across it? Did you always know you had it? Give us the backstory.
Okay, so I always knew I had it, but I'd forgotten about it. I mean, I just, you know, it never even occurred to me. And it was at the South Street Seaport, and it was an afternoon, and it was raining, and I was talking to somebody else. I was doing another interview, and the guy said to me, so obviously this must have been like a radio presentation or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God, that completely makes sense. That's why it's in the afternoon. That's why there's like only 9 songs. You know, I was like, oh God, it totally makes sense. And that's why the audio is that good. I was like, it completely makes sense. I do not remember what radio station it was, but it would have been whatever the rock radio station was in New York at the time, or the main ones for sure. And it was just, one of the guys I work with said to me, you know, Sass, one of the main questions you get from your fans is, why don't you put out a live album? And just as he goes, and the fact is, it was coming up on a year of Taylor being gone, and it might be a really nice tribute to him if you did this, you know, along with just putting it out for your fans, because, you know, it's been a year. You know, it's a painful, horrible thing, but at least here we get to hear him right at the beginning in all his glory, this incredible soul whom I love so dearly and missed horribly, and now it's out for everybody else to enjoy and celebrate him as well.
Yeah, I of course knew Taylor and loved him as well, and I used to speak to him all the time about the early days of his career, and you came up often when I spoke to him, because I would bring you up and he would say nothing but wonderful things about his time in your band and playing with you. I can't remember the timeline though. He was with you prior to Alanis Morissette or after?
Prior. They came, Alanis and her manager came to the last show we did for that tour, which was in LA at the Pantages Theater. I was opening for Steve Perry, and I'd never heard of Alanis because I was living in the States at the time, and as you may know, it doesn't necessarily trickle down. You would know because you have so many friends in the business, but as far as, you know, generally speaking, and I had never heard of her. And they were looking for people to be in her band, and it was the very last show of my tour. So when they called and said, we want to hire Taylor and Nikki, do you mind? I'm like, of course not. They're musicians. They need jobs, you know, so go for it. And 5 months later, biggest goddamn band on the planet. No, the very first professional touring band he was ever in was with me.
Yeah, and it's ironic that he went from you to Alanis because, like you said, I mean, 2 Canadian women lead singers, and, you know, Taylor was from Southern California, of course. So it's interesting how he found himself in that early on. So Taylor and Nick go to her band, but they're on this recording of yours, and then the other person on this recording, who I knew for sure back in the day, was on guitar, Stevie Salas. And he's a
Yep,
great
yep.
player who's still active today. How did you first connect with him back then?
Oh man, that's a good. Okay, I know how it was. I had a friend who worked at Island Records, and Stevie's first record,
Color Code.
Color Code. Yep,
Yeah.
that was on Island Records, and this guy Steve Frost. And so Steve said to me, "You got to meet Stevie Sass," and everybody else was like, "Oh God, no way." So, anyways, we ended up meeting and we just hit it off and we started writing these songs and it just went from there. It was actually Stevie's friend who told us about Taylor. They said, we know that because I was looking for a band for the 94 tour, the Raps tour. And it was a friend of Stevie's who said, "Yeah, I know this kid down on Laguna Beach, man. He's amazing." And so that is really, that's how we brought him up to audition him. Yep, that's what happened. I remember that.
So when you listen back to this, it's awesome that you've put this out because it's a great band. You sound great on it. The music's great. But really the catalyst for you in doing this and putting out a record that's almost 30 years old and hasn't come out before as far as a live recording was really predominantly to celebrate Taylor, right?
Yeah, and also to celebrate my fans who've been asking for that for so long, you know?
Right.
It was really, it was the combo. It was just a perfect combo.
Were you
perfect combo of reasons.
Were you approached at all, Sass, about taking part in the Taylor Hawkins tribute shows?
No.
Were you bummed about that?
No, I don't like those kinds of things. I probably wouldn't have done it anyway. I'm not crazy about stuff like that. I always feel very uncomfortable about it. I can't really explain why. I don't like big, huge fest like that.
Right.
And also, it was just a it was a horrible. Just losing our friend was gnarly. I didn't, and I just did the. Anyways, it's hard to explain because it's so emotional.
No, and I do understand it though because it was amazingly brief time after he passed away that they came together. So I have a lot of friends who did play those and it was very conflicted because it was still so raw that, there were some people who just like, this is, they just weren't ready to be in that mode yet, which I completely understand both sides, but like you said, it hasn't even been a year and there were these two gargantuan events. So I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Anywho, we all love him to death. He's the most magnificent being.
We understand both sides, but like you said, it hasn't even been a year and there were these two gargantuan events. So I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Anywho, we all love him to death. He's the most magnificent being. He still is on the other side. I can feel him. I get his excitement. And then listening to this record live in New York 94 just brings me right back into it, so hopefully it does that for anyone else who's listening.
Yeah, I'm really glad you put it out. I think it's a great band across the board. Obviously, hearing Taylor so early on with you is fantastic. And then, the songs. And I would tell people listening to this, if they've never heard, they're not familiar with your music and this period of your music and these first few records, at least that we were exposed to here in America, that it's definitely, if you love some good bluesy hard rock, check out Racine, check out Rats, check out some of those early records because they really are killer records. And it was just such a good band, and it's very well captured on this live recording.
Awesome. Hey, Eddie, I gotta go. I gotta go do this TV thing.
Are you still doing that? You're still doing the American Idol thing?
No,
a different thing.
It's a TV interview thing. I gotta do it. I got to do it, kid. But I'll be back.
Go do it, Sass.
Again. Okay.
Go do it.
Great talking to you.
You too. Take care, okay?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
There she goes, everybody. Sass Jordan. I can't remember ever speaking to her. I'm sure I probably did back when these records came out initially, but I did, especially that second one, Rats. It's hard to figure, it's so hard to figure why some of these artists break in America in a big way and others don't. We've pondered that and talked about that so many times on this show. And of course, we do those Canadian roundtables, and we're probably due to do another one again soon. And all of these artists come up. Some of them had some degree of success in the U.S., like Sass. Sass got some rock radio airplay on those first couple records in America. Some got zero success, and you never heard of them. And of course, some became huge on both sides of the border, whether it be Rush or Triumph or Loverboy or whatever. So it's just so interesting how that all plays out, and when you look back on stuff. But anyway, thanks to Sass Jordan, great, real interesting stuff there on Van Halen. I had kind of forgotten about that. When you remember those stories about Van Halen, who were very much toying with the idea of bringing in a female lead singer, the one that comes up all the time is Patti Smythe, the singer from Scandal. That was talked about pretty openly at the time. And Patti, I've heard talk about it as well. And I think she was pretty close with Eddie Van Halen back then. But the one you don't hear talk about is Sass Jordan. And as you just heard, she was there for 4 months with them, living in Southern California, as she said, getting beer and cigarettes and just kind of hanging out. And they were obviously kicking the tires about her maybe singing in the band or maybe singing on a record. And then after 4 months, nothing happened. And she's just got the stories left. That's about it. Pretty wild. All right. So Live in New York 94 is out now. You'll hear a little bit of a live track, again, featuring Taylor Hawkins on drums.